Well, first of all, we're going to table this because we don't have it.
Yes.
Well, that's the thing, I could not figure out the red line version, but it seemed like the horse racing.
It has nothing to do with this, what she's saying.
Put it up in the town line. We'll be right into it. All right. 5:28. Everybody's behind the beam, aren't they? Got it. Not bad. Chris. So, I guess I do have to do a motion to table this thing in those workshop because we have it on there.
Well, no, time for a resolution, yeah. So I think we should table it. Based on, want me to make a comment about it?
Sure. I mean,
Sure. Regarding the first item, resolution to amend.
well, let's wait till we get out of the
Oh,
table.
I'm sorry.
Karen.
Your mic's not even on yet.
Yeah.
The other one was like really stupid. The way I read it, I was like, what?
Well, Karen, whatever you tell us, thumbs up.
Dress up for a play.
All right.
Okay, let's go. And I guess, Charlie, we are on TV, so I'll just say that welcome everybody to the November 10th, 2022 Town Board Workshop. I guess we have 6 agenda items tonight, but the first one we're going to get taken care of really quick. There's a tabled item from last Thursday's board meeting. Town Attorney Genesi, can you explain what we're going to
Sure.
table again?
This is a matter that the supervisor and I have been, among others, within the town, negotiating with the county attorney's office and various persons at the county, the department heads of the county regarding the flood wall and a couple other related matters regarding the sandbar and sewer lines, et cetera. The two have sort of been negotiated together, and we were ready to agree to certain terms on this particular one, the flood wall. However, the county has decided that they want to do it as a package. We don't have the contract yet, so we're unable to sign something we don't have in front of us. I would not recommend it. I'm sure the board would not recommend it or agree to have the supervisor sign it.
Yeah. Kind of simple as that.
Yeah.
We'll have to do a resolution to approve of amended IMA. We haven't seen the IMA, so unless any questions from the board, I make a motion that we table once again the resolution to amend the intermunicipal agreement with the County of Monroe regarding Webster flood wall ready project MO 78.
Second. Supervisor Flaherty?
Aye.
Councilwoman Cataldi? Aye. Councilman Abbott?
Aye.
Councilman Cahill?
Aye.
Councilwoman Leonard?
Patty, you think that was okay for me to read that motion?
Because you're not signing.
Right. Now we get to the fun part of the meeting. Now we have 5 presentations tonight, pretty heavy for a workshop, but we also only have 1 workshop in November because I don't think I can get anybody in here on Thanksgiving for a workshop. And a little spoiler, we're only going to have 1 workshop in December too. So these presentations I think are pretty important and timely. So with that being said, our first one tonight is a presentation. Is it Hannah?
Hannah is stuck in traffic, so.
Okay, because, all right, well, I know
But yes.
Alexander Popovich is here, and she will present along with Hannah Welser when she does come in. Present a concept of a smoke-free town park. So I'll hand the baton to you.
I do have some packets. How would you like me to distribute?
Is that what you're going through?
Yes.
Let's pass them out.
So my name is Lexi Popovich. I'm the director of the Smoking Health Action Coalition of Livingston and Monroe County. Monroe Counties, we are a program of the American Lung Association. And we have been here before to kind of discuss the ins and outs of tobacco-free parks. And I'll just give a brief overview of some of the benefits, and then we kind of jump right into what's been going on in the state and what that means locally here. But tobacco-free outdoor areas, of course, protect individuals from secondhand smoke and promote healthy environments. When tobacco is less visible in the public landscape, youth are actually less likely to view it as a common part of adult behavior, to which they might expect to use and initiate with these products. With the expansion and rise of e-cigarettes that we've seen in the past several years with youth, creating spaces that don't allow tobacco or vaping is really important to educate youth and young adults on the risk that this has on their brain and health. As of October 2022, so just last month, New York State legislation did pass that smoking of tobacco and cannabis is actually prohibited in any public park, including parks, beaches, pools, boardwalks, recreation centers, group camps, marinas, and playgrounds. The smoke-free provisions apply to both state-owned parks as well as those managed by local governments. So ultimately, the state this would not include vaping or vaping of marijuana in these areas. So that includes all the municipal parks, including the town of Webster, would be smoke and tobacco-free with the use of smoking cannabis and smoking, combustible traditional cigarettes. But this does not yet include, the e-cigarettes or vaping of marijuana, which is highly prevalent among youth and young adults, especially in some of our suburbs that we've worked with when, and also a lot of schools. So we're kind of here to educate, and we're working with a lot of other municipalities in our community on the importance of adding in vaping, or even vaping marijuana as well into the law locally. So the state encourages that local municipalities make these more comprehensive because they did not include vaping. They also, in the current public health law prohibiting the smoking in the local park does not include any sidewalks adjoining parks or public places, any pedestrian routes through park strips or malls, parking lots or roadways in any portion of the park that is not used for park purposes. So basically, we are educating our local leaders and stakeholders on the importance of adding vaping into this policy that was just passed through the state. There also is, the state authorizes local municipalities to impose a $50 penalty for some of these violations of using tobacco or cannabis, specifically smoking that in these parks. And in the packets, we provided information on the law, the New York State law, and what that would mean to add in vaping. And the Village of Webster recently just went tobacco and vape free in all their parks and grounds prior to this state law coming into effect. And so I have provided a copy of that policy in there as well.
Any questions from the board at this point? Lexi, is that one part of the presentation that you want the Q&A?
Yeah, definitely. So
Okay.
that's just kind of a brief overview of kind of what we're looking to educate on, and if that might be of use to help the board with any questions or interest. We also provide free signage as well. We provided that free signage for the town of Arundecoit, the town of Harrington, the town of Brighton, and the Village of Webster, including our local colleges that we helped go tobacco and vape free. That included University of Rochester, Nazareth College, and RIT. We're also working with SUNY Geneseo on hopefully an upcoming policy. So we do offer free signage, and I know with the new law you can see in there that the state does require signage. So we can help with that as well in terms of if the board was to decide that adding vaping is something that they're interested
So Lexi, I know that this is not the first time you've presented this to this board, but is it do I have it right that the last time we heard from New York State had not enacted this law yet?
That's correct.
So now New York State has enacted a law of smoke-free parks, which also includes all of our municipal parks.
That's correct.
So the only thing that we would be doing, should we decide to sign on to this suggestion, is we would be not allowing vaping.
Yes, so it would make local laws more comprehensive to add in no vaping. And we see that as one of the biggest issues with youth. You don't see a lot of adults in the parks vaping. It would primarily be groups of young adolescents sitting together and using these products, and also co-use with vaping of marijuana as well. Because this law does include the smoking of marijuana, it does not include specifically vaping of marijuana as well.
So what is the village putting forth with respect to enforcing this law?
There's gonna be a very question.
So basically, at least best practices in tobacco control is signage as reinforcing and enforcing through the public, and posting of signage, educating the community on this law and making sure people are aware of this. So it kind of self-serves itself, that community citizens and members, if you have a family and someone is smoking cigars or, cigarettes and there's kids around, usually people will say something or notice the signage. There have been parks that have receptacles at the entrances, so people are encouraged to, know to not go use that in the parks as well. But I think overall, New York State does outline how enforcement does work, and it's also in the packet as well.
Yeah, I see where there's a $50 fine in there, but again, how do they enforce that?
So
Do
usually,
they call, so if there's a family there, and there are children, and there's a guy smoking marijuana or whatever, I take it they would call 911, and police officer would be dispatched. Am I following that right from an enforcement standpoint?
in the past, at least anecdotally, what we hear is people either would say something or bring this up to their town or village municipal government, or those who are out working the Parks and Rec department, who are actually visiting, doing trash and things at some of the parks. So that's usually where some of those mechanisms come into play. But usually, at least the state outlines that signage is one of the primary mechanisms of enforcement itself, and setting that precedent that is a healthy community, getting earned media when, say you were to include a vape into the policy, that would kind of, we worked with the town of Veronic, made a big announcement in the paper, we did a little press on it, and, just really educating people on this so people are aware. So that's usually kind of the more enforcement techniques that even the state and comprehensive tobacco control usually promote.
I think what Councilman McHale was probably getting at is that we saw with the masking mandates around that there was a bit of overreach. I'm not saying there would be here, but there was a bit of overreach in some jurisdictions in some areas, including there was one incident, I think, at the Webster Central School District board meeting, one of the meetings. And it's a little unclear as to how these things are enforced, if somebody can put hands on, if somebody can just ticket them, and then who handles the ticket, does it go to the town court? It's not the concept that concerns me as town attorney, it's how do we enforce it? Because otherwise it's meaningless. I mean, it's good to have up the signs and tell people they shouldn't be doing it, and I think that, social pressure has pretty much wiped out most cigarette smoking, for example, and that's worked. This is going to be a little bit different. You have, as you said, it's mainly directed really toward adolescents who are smoking. I think most adults are going to comply. I don't think we're going to have an issue.
But at this point, the state has already put this law in place, and it's up to us and how we want to enforce it. We're just adding vaping.
Right.
And that,
And I understand that, and I just fall back on how is it, how do we enforce this? If somebody calls and complains, okay? Because I don't envision myself, if I'm at a park and there's, a young adult vaping, I'm not gonna go over and tell them to stop. And there could be 10 signs over there saying you're not allowed to do that. But I fall back on enforcement, because I don't wanna be subjected to that. what do? Do I call the police department? What is the feedback that you have gotten from other municipalities with respect to what they have done for enforcement? Because the legislature can pass all sorts of laws. We've seen what they've done recently with the gun laws in New York State, which 2 of them have been ruled unconstitutional. I see the part here where they talk about, if it's taken to court, this is probably what would happen, but I don't know if this is a test in court yet. Do you?
No, but with this new law coming into effect in the whole state, I guess a lot of municipalities right now are probably coming up with similar things with enforcement and actually how to go about this.
Right.
I know locally, there have been, not a hotline, but an open forum that you could write complaints, or this park is seeing a lot of activity with youth, can someone please check this out? So it's something to kind of keep a list of maybe complaints. Obviously, someone can't dispatch, right away. There's other things that are criminal that are happening, or other things that need to be taken care of. But maybe a list of, to keep.
This says a civil penalty, the law says civil penalty.
Yes, it does.
So it's not a criminal penalty, it's a civil penalty. I'm guessing, based on that it would go to, be up to the town to sue the person?
Yeah, so I think other municipalities before this law, code enforcement or other places that would kind of get involved if there's a civil penalty. A lot of the ones we worked with did not have punitive type, they didn't charge, money. It was more of an educational thing, the signage. But now with the civil penalty, like you stated, there's hopefully going to be more outlines through the state what this would look like with the range of municipalities, but it's already happening. So, this is something we're going to have to deal with anyways, but we can help provide those resources on how to kind of get there and what other places that we work with are doing as well.
Well, Councilman Gale brought up the fact of calling 911. If you do that, the police are doing it also. Right. So the sheriff or somebody, you would not be, I don't foresee, we have our Commissioner of Parks and Recreation here, I don't foresee that he would have his staff enforcing this. I don't think. He wouldn't have the authority or the means, really. Nor would I recommend it. I think that's just a little concerning as to how exactly, what if somebody persists, they say, I'm not going to give you my name, I'm not going to, what do you do? Then it can then devolve into possibly a criminal matter at that point. You could have a harassment or menacing or various kinds of quasi-assault.
This package with the Q&A, page 3 says, how's the law enforced? A person who violates the law by smoking outdoors in restricted areas is subject to, quote, a civil penalty of $50 for each violation, unquote. It's a great answer, but you're bringing us what's the means to get to this civil penalty? Interesting. As Charlie said, Chris, you're here. This law just passed 3.5 months ago. It's relatively new. Also in the Q&A, it says, New York State law requires signs to be posted in the outdoor areas where smoking is restricted. Yes. So now, I know the parks, for the most part, are winding down. Bathrooms are closing, all that, but
So, I was aware that the legislation was there. I was not up to date. Usually, those are the updates we get from New York State Parks and Recreation. So I would assume that probably in the next update is when we'll probably get the actual notice and the law, so to speak, in regards to a link. Signage, and I agree with you, from complying to the law. Whether the town board decides to have vaping, that's probably going to be a further discussion. I agree with you, John, that the biggest issue that we will have is from an enforcement, because as Charlie, as you mentioned, being able to respond to those calls. We get them now. Number of calls from a similar example is dogs off leash. People are at one of the parks and there's dogs that are off leash. We get a number of calls. All we can tell them is basically exactly what you just said. Is, the ordinance is that the dogs have to be on a leash. We can't dispatch, so to speak, somebody out there. We have had, and I know of people that have called 911. But from a resource standpoint, I'm not sure that's,
So
You know,
just
kind
out
of
of
the direction.
curiosity, Chris, and I don't know if this is applicable or not, but do you receive phone calls and complaints that people are vaping in our parks?
no. I'd say probably about the only time that we would get those type of calls between vaping, drinking. is Usually if there's some sort of athletic event, as silly as that sounds, but adult softball, that's a good example. You know, we'll get an occasional call, you know, that they were at a game and, you know, the person next to them was smoking a cigarette or having cigars or drinking beer, whatever. We explain the town policy, etc. Now with this new regulation, we have a little bit of a different angle we can take. But I wouldn't say we get, the number one call that we get from those kind of concerns is from dogs off leash.
Thank you.
Well, I mean, we could debate all day long about whether we think the law is constitutional and this and that, the fact that there is a child corrective law. If it's a state law, we don't have the authority to write a code to say, oh, we're not gonna adhere to it.
Apparently not. I mean, it's a state law.
Was, as part of that, did you say that
It's here.
that the $50 fine was up to $50, or was that is part of the law?
That is part of the law for municipalities to handle.
Actually,
And I also suppose that's how far each municipality wants to go to enforcement. So I know that there have got to be times when people are in the park and behavior is not appropriate. And they could be asked to leave if they want to continue that behavior that's not allowed in the park. And certainly if that were to escalate, now there's a whole nother reason that 911 would be called. But it does give you some wherewithal to say, I'm sorry, but that's not allowed in the park. If you want to continue, you're going to have to leave.
and that would be a police officer saying that, I take it.
Most
Obviously,
likely, if
obviously,
it escalates to
Chris
that,
is going to
I
dispatch
mean,
someone out
if
to
it
do
happens
that.
at, you know,
Nor would I recommend that.
8:45 at night,
Safety.
exactly when there's a softball game going on, most likely that's what it is.
Lexi, do you have more of these packets?
I have one more packet.
Oh.
I can.
Chris, I'd love for you to have one.
Yeah.
Because just the Q and A alone is we, I mean, the law's here, so we're gonna have to do what the law says. But, yeah, we'll have to, I mean, I see the irony of the fact that the state puts out this law. Like I said, I'm not here to debate whether it's a good law or a bad law. What I think, and this is just my personal opinion, that the smoke that has the most pungent odor 100 yards away is not a cigar or a cigarette, it's marijuana. And I think whether you are smoking at a joint or whatever, vapes, it doesn't kill that smell. If you're smoking THC or marijuana in a vape, it's going to permeate that whole park. Which I find ironic that the state went for a law that wants to make smoke free.
It's probably because we legalized marijuana. Everything was related to it.
But you said that like smoking other forms of marijuana, and please don't make me rattle off all the ways you can smoke marijuana, okay, it's not a good look. But those are covered in this state law.
Right, so basically it almost seems, at least in the work in the field we're in, that it's covering a lot of adult behaviors. A lot of friends my age would use vaping cartridges, they're called, which is vaping marijuana. I often don't know many people who, still smoke actual marijuana, like the actual plant. And not many adults, other than, youth and young adults and college to maybe 30s are doing a lot of vaping. So those aren't included in, when you think about, when you said the athletic events, sporting events where there's a lot of youth. I remember when I was in high school, we go to a lot of parks. That's where a lot of kids congregate. And I think this kind of, it's more of a signaling to, we work at the schools, more of a signaling to youth and superintendents and, that vaping is bad for you if you're that young. Vaping marijuana is bad for you. It's not legal under 21. So things like that, that's signaling that like this is not allowed here, and this is spaces where you go to exercise and hang out with friends. And I think that's kind of the more the principle of it.
and I don't want to cut, this is a great conversation and good dialogue. We have 15-minute segments, but we continue on past 15 minutes if there's robust conversation, and we did. It's a great segue, though, to the next presentation with Josh Artuso and Jim Montgomery. I know, Jim, you just started here a couple months ago, and you've kind of shined the light on, we're trying to make sure that our code, laws, whatever, have a path to enforcement and then to the court system. And there is some ambiguity there. This one seems to have ambiguity. I don't know how you would get that $50 civil fine, and maybe the state has written up some things beyond the Q&A, but I'm gonna guess not. So there's the enforcement, and John, you're right. I mean, that is, I certainly wouldn't advocate that, hey, tell Glenn and the Parks Department, they're gonna be our new rangers for enforcing. No. So we'll have to have further conversation on that. And as far as whether we move to doing what the Village of Webster did and that's another kind of fish too, I think, that needs further discussion. But,
Well, and I think that's the reason Lexi is here,
yeah.
is to educate us on why perhaps we might want to add vague to it. And I, for one, am not willing to let the enforcement issue stand in the way of making a statement about a healthier community. Because we've got enforcement as an issue right now.
Anything else on this tonight? Chris, we'll make sure you have one of these.
Up to good.
Well, thanks, Lexi.
Thank you, appreciate it.
And by the way, did Hannah slide? Are you Hannah?
Yes, I am. Sorry, I had traffic on the way here.
That's all right. I think Lexi did a great job, and thank you.
You're welcome.
And like I said, that segues kind of into our next item tonight is a presentation by Josh Artuso and Jim Montgomery on property maintenance and code compliance issues in the town of Webster. So I'll hand the time to Josh and Jim.
Thanks, Supervisor. So for those of you that may not have met Jim yet, this is Jim Montgomery, our new code compliance coordinator. He comes with 5 years of experience in municipal building and code compliance. He started back in September, as Supervisor Flaherty mentioned. And the board may recall back in May when we changed some of the shed and fence setback regulations. Part of that presentation had several other topics that we were hoping to address. And we're happy to finally be back here tonight to be tackling the first one of those, which is property maintenance and code compliance. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jim, and we'll go through the presentation.
Thank you, John. I like the segue, Mr. Supervisor. We are going to be talking about grass, but not that kind of grass.
Thank you.
He comes with a sense of humor. I love it.
You're going to fit in well here, Jim.
I hope so. So tonight, I want to thank you guys for allowing us to give this presentation tonight. We are going to be talking about property maintenance as it relates to code compliance. And firstly, I do want to say that I have been working, I've been working for another municipality for 5 years, enforcing New York State property maintenance codes, New York State building codes, and also getting other municipal codes added to town code. So this isn't my first go around with that either. So to start, we are going to be talking about yard maintenance and the yard maintenance complaints that the town has gotten in 2022. I mean tall grass, overgrown weeds, overgrown plantings, and hazardous vegetation. You'll see on the slide there that we received 44 complaints, and 14 of those complaints were actual violations. But it's also important to note that these are the log complaints in our IPS system. Our IPS system is our case management system. And before I started my job here in Webster, the complaints coming in were handled by a number of different staff members. So not everything was logged into IPS. So I can assure you that number is actually very larger than 44. Our current town code defines yard maintenance as to cut, trim, or remove brush, grass, rubbish, and weeds, or to spray with herbicides, cut, trim, remove, or destroy poisonous shrubs or weeds upon land on a regular basis as to prevent excessive growth, maintain safe conditions and uniform appearance. Established lawns areas must be cut and maintained on a regular basis so that ground cover does not exceed 8 inches in height. Now, this is a great definition of yard maintenance. The issue is it's not used in any ordinance in our town code. A resident cannot be in violation of the definition. The definition needs to be used in an ordinance. So right now, I have no ability to tell someone that they need to cut their grass if they are indeed in violation of New York State code, which mimics this. And we'll get into that in just a minute. The next piece I wanted to talk about was what I'm going to be calling junk. In our town code, we currently have a number of definitions for things that are like junk or refuse. They are bulk refuse, construction, demolition debris, garbage, rubbish, hazardous waste, household hazardous waste, large appliances, refuse, rubbish, solid waste, yard waste, and wood waste. What you'll see on this slide is there are two of those definitions are highlighted in green, and the rest are in red. The ones in green are used in accordance in our code as it pertains to storage on private property. Those in red are not. So they are just definitions that are not used. So it's great that we have them, but they're not doing anything. These are the three sections that I just referred to that refuse and bulk refuse are used in as it relates to storage on private property. 186.18, deposit of public or private property. 225.66, outdoor storage, and that's important to note that that's for commercial districts within the zoning code. And then 186.17, accumulation, burning, burial, and exceptions. So those are those three statutes. And that's the limited power that we currently have to enforce any kind of refuse ordinance. This next slide shows a couple examples of refuse or rubbish or junk, but also in those pictures, as you can see, they are a blight to neighbors in the surrounding areas or anybody driving by. But a lot of the items there don't fall into any definition for them. I don't have any enforcement powers. So although you might not like looking at it, you're stuck with it. So how do we fix this problem, and where do we begin? Well, to start, in and around the year 2020, New York State adopted or kind of partnered with the ICC code, the International Code Council code. Before that, there was the ICC code was an international code that some states chose to adopt and some states did not. So municipalities get on the bandwagon or they wouldn't. But in 2020, New York State adopted these codes, and I've included 3 code sections from the New York State Property Maintenance Code. One of which that's very important is the second one you'll see is New York Section 103.1 Administration and Enforcement. It says the uniform code shall be administered and enforced by the authority having jurisdiction. We are the authority having jurisdiction. The uniform code is part of the uniform code is the property maintenance code. This next slide shows Monroe County and some of the area municipalities outside of Monroe County that have begun to adopt the New York State Uniform Code, including the Property Maintenance Code. The darker the green you see, the more adoption and the more implemented it's become, and the lighter green, there's little to no adoption. As you can see, Webster is lacking in this area. Actually, the only spot that the uniform code is brought up is in the fire prevention code. So Josh and I, we came up with some recommendations for the town board tonight for you to consider. The first being to incorporate the New York State Uniform Code into the current zoning code. So the new chapter 350 zoning would have a section or an ordinance that's standard of adoption. And that would read, the town board of the town of Webster does hereby adopt the provisions of the New York State Uniform Fire Prevention, Building Code, and Property Maintenance Codes of the New York State and makes them applicable to the town of Webster. And this verbiage would allow us to enforce the New York State Property Maintenance Code as needed within our existing zoning code. I know that I'm speaking fast, but I do have a lot to get through, so I apologize. The zoning code, a lot of it is what I already enforce. So to add extra teeth to it is going to allow us to do more within the property maintenance of commercial property, of residential properties. In addition to that, our second recommendation would be to create a property maintenance chapter. This chapter would be called property maintenance, and in that, we would have to, again, have a standards of adoption, reading essentially the same thing the town board of the town of Webster does, hereby adopt the provisions of the New York State Uniform Fire Prevention Building Code and Property Maintenance Codes of New York State and makes them applicable to the town of Webster. We're not reinventing the wheel here. This is what other municipalities have done. Recommendation number 3 would be adding a yard maintenance ordinance instead of just a definition. So we would create a dedicated chapter, obviously covering property maintenance, including the definitions, regulations, and administration enforcement processes and procedures. We would include a section that reads something like, heavy undergrowth and accumulation of plant growth which are noxious or detrimental to the health and safety shall be eliminated as required by the New York State Uniform Prevention and Building Code. Except for farms, grass, weeds, trees, and other plant growth shall be cut or trimmed to avoid the development of places for accumulation of blown trash, dumping, rodent harborage, infestation, and criminal activity, or places which constitute blight or unsettling influence to the neighborhood. And grass and weeds shall not exceed 10 inches in height. It's important to note, though, we would also need to add an additional provision that provides the code enforcement official, myself, to initiate remedial action in cases of non-compliance after due process. So that's a lot of vomit that I just threw at you. What that essentially means is, if you don't come into compliance in the time that I provide, I can issue a work order if you're neglecting to come into compliance. Our fourth recommendation would be an outdoor storage ordinance. This is more of an umbrella ordinance so that we can attack certain things that are a blight to the neighborhood. So again, we would create that property maintenance chapter, and within it would be this ordinance for outdoor storage of junk. So the outdoor storage or maintenance of junk shall be permitted, or shall not be permitted, excuse me, on any lot or in any district. And inside this, we would also have a definition of junk, and I would say, as used in this section, the term junk, again, this is a hot topic item, believe it or not, shall mean any manufactured good, appliance, fixture, furniture, machinery, motor vehicle, recreational vehicle, trailer, or similar object which is abandoned, demolished, discarded, dismantled, or so worn, deteriorated, or in such a condition that is not generally usable in its existing state. And in layman's terms, this essentially means it's not readily usable for its intended purpose. And then also we would have to add an additional provision that would authorize the code official, myself, to issue a work order if the homeowner was reluctant or refused to come into compliance. So Josh and I, we discussed what we believe the next steps would be. Ultimately, it would be up to the board to draft ordinance and public review and comment, schedule public hearings for future town board meetings, and then adopt and implement new regulations.
Jim, I gotta tell you, that was, you got that done in 11 minutes, and there's a lot there.
I can talk fast.
Yeah, that's, well, and, you know, I will say that presentation, if it isn't already up on our town website or social media platforms, it will be, for citizens to see, especially if we do proceed on with, you know, the next steps, you know, whether that's in the next week or if it's in the next 6 months. It's a very good foundation for people to look at from a standpoint of what the problems have been.
Absolutely.
And potential ways to.
It's also important to know that all the photos that are on the presentation are homes within Webster.
That was my next question.
Yep,
Yeah.
that was my first question.
Well, it was mine too, but I was saving it for the question segment.
It is?
Hey, you know, when we put this together, Bill, we wondered if there was a privacy issue, but we don't have any addresses or anything like that, so we. Well, I know, right? Let's not name names, but yeah, believe it or not, that presentation, and I know you guys showed it to me as we were tinkering and trying to get it down to a 10-minute presentation so we could have Q&A. Yeah, all those pictures are properties in our great town Webster.
So I think your presentation's outstanding. and sorely needed with respect to enforcement and definitions being spelled out. And speaking for myself, I hope we do move to the next step. My question and concern is issuing a work order, not so much for an abandoned property, but if someone is living in the property, and, you know, one man's junk is another man's treasure, sort of thing, right? And would we have to go to court and have a court order before we issue a work order?
So, Councilman, that's actually a great question, and a lot of this comes down to a judgment call. So if it was an occupied home, in my training experience, I wouldn't issue a work order for that.
Okay.
I would forward that case to court.
Right.
Because as you said, one man's junk is another man's treasure. I'm not gonna rob that man for his treasure. I'm gonna discuss it with him at a later date in court.
Okay, thanks. That was my concern.
Sure.
That's a great answer. I appreciate that.
And this is not a property maintenance question, we might be going down a rabbit hole with this, but we get a lot of complaints. Is parking in a front lawn off of the driveway just in the grass permitted in this town, or is that not in our code yet?
It is not under code right now.
Because I believe it is.
It is in those, yes, you're correct. Something you may want to consider.
Exactly.
And this opens the door to going down that road.
Right.
Well, as long as Jim used the word, open the door, I'm not to be a buzzkill, but I also appreciate, property rights, or, we gotta be careful not to move toward homeowner association-esque.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
She's trying to treat me well, but, talking out of both sides of my mouth, I'm sure, at least in the almost 3 years I've been supervisor, this presentation, we get a lot of these calls from irate neighbors. And I'm not, I've said to these people, I'll sometimes drive by to see what they're talking about, because, it's a visual. They're trying to explain to me in an email. And when I get back to the neighbor or the, whatever that's complaining, I said, look, to be honest with you, maybe I'm just getting old. I wouldn't want that next to me. I wouldn't want that across the street from my house. But we don't, there are certain situations that we don't have any power to do anything. It's a one man's junk is another man's castle. And Patty, I saw you just, maybe that's what we're trying to see if we can do something.
It is, but I think we also have to realize that when you look at some of these pictures, some of these things are so egregious that it really is an infringement on the neighborhood and the people who live near this.
I agree. I agree. It's funny, and didn't you say, Jim, you hit the ground running a couple months ago, and within your due diligence of just kind of looking at stuff, didn't you meet with our town judges and kind of get their feel that
We did.
their hands are tied to certain things?
Yes, actually, I'm glad you brought that up, Supervisor. I neglected to mention that I did meet with one of the judges, and cases like this have been brought to him, to his court before, and because the town has not adopted the New York State Property Maintenance Code, he feels that the constituent doesn't really know that they're in violation of something. So until we do that, I can't even bring it to court. So
Because you
until-
can't be in violation of the definition.
Well, as far as proper as yard maintenance goes, yes, but you can't be in violation of something you're unaware of either. If the constituent can't look it up, the judge has a hard time finding them guilty of that.
Let me ask you something else, what's the penalty?
For which, actually, the town decides that.
Oh, okay. Well, in your prior jurisdiction,
For which?
for violation of the property code in New York State.
It would be a fine
How
of
much?
$1 amount. It could be up to
The
$1,000.
dollar amount makes a difference.
So, sure, I
Because
could tell you,
it could rise, if it rises to the level of misdemeanor
sure.
fight, then the person is entitled to a jury trial.
Councilman, that's far above my pay grade to decide. what
No,
the-
that's what I'm wondering what the experience was, of
Yeah.
how to handle it. That, there's a lot here, there's an awful lot.
Sure.
This has been brought up in the whole time I've
Yeah,
been town attorney, and there's a lot of reasons why, it's a great idea, again, it's a great idea the state puts these things into effect, but there's no real means of enforcing.
okay. So in my experience, I believe I've seen fines of up to $1,000 a day. Now,
Correct.
having said that, we would have recommendations to the judge. I can't tell you a single time that I made a recommendation to the judge for a $1,000 fine.
But if it's on the books for $1,000, it automatically would be fine. For something like that, it'd be entitled to the church. I'm just telling you.
Oh, right, yeah, sure.
And you or whoever's writing up the complaint, would have to, I'm sure the judge already told you this, you have to be very specific as to what section is being violated, how, and you have to treat this like it was a criminal matter.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, the good news is I used to be in law enforcement, so I'm used to doing
Okay,
that.
so you're familiar with doing it. Well, but you're not gonna be the only one doing this, right? I mean, eventually, there's
Well,
gonna be
hopefully
something
there's a
else.
training experience that people, the next person comes in with.
There'll be other people that'll be doing it.
Yeah.
Let me ask this question with respect to what Charlie's bringing up. When you change the code or add to the code, do you identify, where you used to work, did they identify what the first violation cost would be?
In the code section,
Yeah.
it would be in the penalty section of that chapter.
Right. And it would spell it out, okay, the violation, this first violation is X amount of dollars, second is X amount of dollars, so it's not up to your discretion, it's already spelled out, right?
Up to this, yes, but it's, in my experience, I've never gone for a max fine.
That's why I said it's up to.
Yes, yes, sir.
And,
I just wanted some clarification, thanks.
and Jim, I know this is, I think, your first time, actually, Charlie's the town attorney, not councilman, but that,
Sorry.
I'm glad, no, if you think about it, what was proposed here tonight was kind of the skeleton of putting it together. I appreciate that you didn't make any proposals of fines and penalties, because really that needs more discussion. As we go through those next steps, I don't want to rush this along to adopt if we don't have some good conversation.
Sure.
There's got to be something that is not just a feel-good for today, but something we look at each other and say, based on this town now, the socioeconomic makeup of it, the 22,000 square foot lots that we built all these houses on over the last 30 years, it's not a farm town with everybody's got 5 acres. What makes sense foreseeable next 20 years, And I would imagine that the setting the per incident fees and penalties, that is part of the town board's charge on this, no pun intended. And Charlie, we would need to know,
No, there's-
are we operating in a
there's-
vacuum, and you're like, yeah, you don't want to set that at that amount,
There's
because
a
you've
lot
got
of-
a jury trial.
There's a lot,
Yeah.
I'm just bringing these things up, because this is, it's not I appreciate the work that you and Josh are doing this. The problem is the whole concept of a maintenance code, a property maintenance code. There's a lot of issues, okay? There's constitutional issues, there are legal issues, there's administrative issues, and it requires more than a 15-minute conversation, obviously.
No doubt.
But we would have to have
No
some
doubt.
real heavy discussions as to how it's gonna work. I have a concern, because probably, first of all, New York is probably, I can tell you, being a lawyer for 5 decades now, almost, we're probably one of the most highly regulated, if not the most highly regulated state in the country. We have more laws and more regulations. I mean, probably every one of us here is in violation of
Yes.
10 or 15 a day, or anyway. But the bottom line is that we would, in order to enforce this, you would have to assume that every single citizen is aware of what is in the code. And that's problematic. So.
Isn't that the case with any code?
Yes, it is. It
And I
is.
think-
You're just adding, what's happening is you're adding more onto it, and it's on somebody's personal property. It's a little bit different than something where you're punching somebody in the nose, say, okay?
I understand, but I think
Yeah.
in the past, I think in the past, we have not addressed this, we haven't looked at it, we haven't gone beyond the 15-minute conversation because of all these concerns. That being said, my time on the town board, the two things that I hear all the time when I'm talking to citizens or when I'm out in the neighborhoods is speed and the appearance of some of these abandoned or neglected properties. And I think that it deserves that extra conversation in an effort to really take a deep dive, look at it, and see what we can improve.
I just want to add that, to Charlie's statement regarding you know, you have to assume that all the residents are aware, which clearly they wouldn't be. So I go back to Jim regarding process. So you get a complaint about a property that has junk all over the place, right? What we define as junk. Well, your first step in the process would be,
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. The first step in the process would be educating the constituent by sending out a notice saying, this is our ordinance, you're in violation of it, you have this much time to correct it. So they would be made aware of the violation.
Just to clarify too, you are not, unless the homeowner admits you, you're not entitled or permitted on the property.
Oh, no, I would never violate a Fourth Amendment, or,
So-
sorry.
Yeah,
No,
so,
no,
so
no.
what you would do is that, as you did with these, is take a picture from a public area, from the
Yes.
street, or a neighbor would take a picture and then give it to you and
Or
say,
the
well,
neighbor, yeah, or the neighbor would give me permission to enter.
to enter their side,
Yes.
their property, yeah,
Yes.
okay. And that's the way it would be done. That's the way it would be, well, started, I guess.
Well, and that's the way any of the codes that we can enforce are handled.
And, you know,
Yeah.
and Jim's only been here for a couple of months, but hit the ground running, and we get these calls to the supervisor's office, so then I immediately, you know, there's two sides to every story. The person calls into me and Kim in my office and says, you know, yeah, you can't believe this, you know, the sky is red in this issue. I go to Jim and say, can you tell me, it ends up, his side of the story is the sky is blue, and given some framework to that, Jim at least is handling it. You get more with honey than you get with vinegar. You're giving them the notice, you're not going on the property. They call, they this and that. You worked with some of these people to say, listen, I realize your yard, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, you have so much there. And there are hoarders out there, let's just call it what it is. Asking you to finish that up by our, you know, in 30 days is almost untenable. So you've set ways where they can make chunks of it and show that they're working with us. And if they work with you and do that, we're not trying to hammer these people, we're trying to work with them. And it's funny, these situations tend to manifest themselves early on. Is the person, they were just ignorant of the law, and now they're made aware of the law, they're making efforts to remedy, or they basically given us a big, you know, whatever. And that's where I think, if they're giving us the big, you know what, we need to have something that we can lean back on via code, via work orders, via civil penalties or whatever they are. Because, and I go back to what you said, Penny, I mean, you know, so 20 people that live around that house have to look at that. I get it, it's subjective. One man's garbage is another man's, you know, castle, but I don't know. The ones that I've been called on the last 3 years, and I go and look, and like I said, maybe I'm just an old fuddy-duddy now, and I'm like, yeah, no, that doesn't, I wouldn't want to live next to that.
Well, the problem, again, I have a lot of problems with the concept, and this is nothing personal that anybody just did, but, you know, I'm looking at this, and it's always been the executive law, there's been references made by the executive law of the state of New York. And that's what former Governor Cuomo signed into law back in 2020. But he put this uniform code in and said basically that every person down in the state is subject to it, and every municipality has the authority and shall administer and enforce it. Okay? Well, how does the average person know what's in that code? I mean, probably every one of us here could be in violation of the code, right? In some ways or other.
Right.
I mean, that's a problem when they pass laws like this, and they say, okay, we're gonna take this whole gigantic, and the code is pretty big, isn't it?
It is, but
I mean,
it's
it's
very
like this, it's inches thick.
No, the property maintenance code is actually probably 30 to 40 pages long.
Okay.
And it's bare minimum. And the other thing is that these municipalities that adopt this, they're not just saying we adopt this, that's it. They're putting the sections into the town code. So so they do have the ability.
Well, that would be the smart thing to do,
Yeah.
yeah, I agree. If you're gonna do it, put it in the code, so that, you know, the people who live there. But I'm just looking at the sections that you quoted. It says such city, town, et cetera, shall administer and enforce. So, anyway, it's something we can discuss, obviously. But I'd be very interested, we don't have to talk about it now, to find out or know what your prior jurisdiction did, how they handled these complaints.
Yeah, I'd love to have that conversation.
Well, unless any other questions or comments from the board, once again, we go past the 15 minutes if there's robust Q&A, which is good. I said last week when we adopted the resolution to clean up the codes, the Barbatin-Scott project that she's been handling for the last 2+ years, I said that was phase 1. Now that we're done with phase 1, we will start looking at phase 2, which is, and this is one of them, taking a look at where do we need to add codes or whatever. So it's funny, I'm already working with Kim in my office to have the workshop of January 26th. I know that's 2.5 months away. The whole theme of that workshop presentation will be these potential phase 2 in this process type of things. Maybe we'll have you back on the 26th of January with some, some other things within this, now that you've heard, the board take on this.
That'd be great.
But thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
Thanks, Art.
Where's Art?
Not seeing that.
Oh, well, next up is a presentation on the highway facility project, the conceptual study and project milestones. And that is going to be done by Pat Stevens, our highway superintendent. So as Pat jumps in the hot seat, this is not the podium of terror, right? That was from last week, right? Oh yes, for everybody watching at home, Councilwoman, Deputy Supervisor Patty Cataldi's got a succulent.
This shall be added to the podium to
So,
hopefully relieve some of the terror.
that's right. Can we have a Christmas present for Diana Davis? We want her to come in and talk. We don't want her to feel scared. Or anybody else for that. With that being said, Pat, it's on hand to you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me tonight. Okay. So we are back tonight to go over another highway facility project. So we've been talking for quite a while about various different things. And one of them has been the conceptual design report. We started back on that quite some time ago. We've been working through it. A lot of different concepts, a lot of different things going on, a lot of moving parts. But we finally have received that final conceptual design report and moving forward with the formal designs we've been here to the board with, and have resolutions to contract different people, but I did want to do a summary of it. The actual conceptual design report will be uploaded along with this to the website. It's about 12 pages long. It has between 10 and 12 attachments that go with it that are the different iterations that we considered for this presentation tonight. We just focused on the one that we're proceeding with, the key traits of that. So, highway facility, I always like to try to touch on the photos that are on each of these. This is actually an aerial photo that was captured by our newly acquired construction management team at campus very, very recently. So this is the most recent up-to-date aerial photo that we have from that particular angle, which is facing basically southeast of our 20-acre facility. To the bottom left-hand corner of the page is the additional 8 acres that we recently acquired. So at the start of the presentation, I decided to cover the traits of the existing property. So our existing property consists of 2 adjacent parcels that total 27.8 acres, which is a large area, which is perfect because we need a lot of space for all of our operations. The uses of the facility will remain the same moving forward. They are administrative offices, equipment storage, material storage, leaf composting, and salt storage are the primary uses of the property. A lot of the yard space that we have on that 27 acres also gets used in states of emergency. So if we have times when there's ice storms or different things of that nature, where there's large amounts of debris on the road where they have to be cleared, we do need space to accommodate that type of thing in those emergency situations as well. So that's one of the reasons that we can really never have too much yard space at one of these facilities. And then an ideal location, center of town. That's come up a couple times more recently. It's main reason why we're so lucky to be able to achieve a design for the site that doesn't require us to relocate. Several other towns that we've talked to that have done projects like this recently don't have the property. They don't have the space already acquired. So they have to go out and acquire and relocate new space, acquire land, look at different sites, figure out which one is the most compatible. We don't have to do that here, so we're very lucky for that. That location that I'm talking about is shown here on this slide. You'll see that it's adjacent to several things. This is very, very centrally located in the town overall, but it's adjacent to recreation trails, existing bus garages, Webster school facilities that are expanding, retail space, a whole slew of different things. There is senior housing to the north of the property. However, we'll get into a little bit here what the concept design that we chose does to make sure that there's not a lot of disruption to that. But in general, it's in a more industrial, commercial area than any other. So the overall structure of this presentation, we have the site layout considerations. So the following slides outline the specific traits of the site layout that was chosen from the 7 different concepts. Those 7 concepts are shown in the actual conceptual report that can also be found on the website. The major topics considered were utilization of existing facilities, department operation, cost, and adjacent property. The first one of those lines is the existing facilities. So we have made investments over the years into building additions and expansions. You've heard me talk about that before on other presentations about our existing facilities. Not all of our facilities are aged out. Cliff Jones building is the main one for that, but even before that, we'll go back to where the slide reads. Main building, we will utilize that throughout construction, and that's huge. The cost to relocate temporarily during the construction of this, which is currently projected at 18 to 24 months once we break ground, would be huge. To rent a 25,000, 30,000 square foot space and relocate all of our maintenance equipment, our mechanic shops and all that, to a completely off-site location while we tore down the existing building and built a new one would be huge. I'm pretty sure it would be in the tune of millions of dollars overall for a 2-year relocation of that type of thing, not to mention the difficulty to provide the same level of service in a temporary facility that we have in our existing facility. So currently, the big draw for the new concept plan and the major thing that it provides, the existing building, is that we don't have to move out while we build the new building. As you can see by the location in the bottom of the screen, it is going to be to the south end of our existing property in our large yard space on the 20-acre parcel that already exists. The Cliff Jones building is newer. It's had several additions. It has conditioned space. It is not in disrepair, so that will stay. That building will remain as it is now and will be utilized, just far less cluttered and jam-packed with equipment than it currently is, which creates logistical issues. The salt barn. We do need a new salt barn. That building does have age, but at this time we have identified it as something that could be phased out. So as we move through the budget and get closer to our final design, and we start getting heading toward the scope that we want to contract, the salt barn does not have to be included. I have gotten intel that there are actually a lot of grant opportunities for salt barns right now, or ample, I shouldn't say a lot. So we're hoping, as we go through our grant search in the next few months here, that that could be a potential area where we could get grant funding for that facility. That would allow us to incorporate it in the first phase not, it could potentially be moved down the road as the existing facility is still serviceable and can remain in service, as it will during the construction, regardless if it's replaced now or slightly down the road. Department operation, that current design plan that was shown on the last slide, allows for efficient, safe spaces to work during all seasons, better protection for equipment from the elements. It maximizes our ability to do in-house repair and maintenance with the new maintenance facility, shop, and lifts. And certain portions of that layout actually allow for additional resident use as far as a good centralized location for spring leaf mulch / compost pickup, possible parking, etc. Some events that we host, we partner with Monroe County for various things where the public comes into our facility. There will be a portion outside of our fenced-in secured area where we can host potentially more of those facilities. There's actually a few recreational type avenues where we pursue this potential down the road for recreational uses of that area also. Cost. I already touched on one of the bigger ones, no temporary relocation. So not having to move out of our existing building until the new one is constructed is a huge cost savings that usually isn't possible. Appropriately sized. The report speaks to some of the research we did this summer and work that our interns did in conjunction with our Department of Public Works to reassess what we had originally thought the overall build out of the town was and make sure that the zoning that we currently have is accurately reflected in that projection, and we were actually able to reduce the overall size of the bays. Based on that, there's no reason to accommodate certain things that could happen in the future that would require us to have more room that may never happen. So we've gotten that narrowed down as we move forward in design. Cost-effective building and site layout. So the overall structure of the building we have is fairly simple in general. It is very large, but it is straight, it is square. It doesn't have a lot of complexities that drive the per square foot cost up. And then the site layout, utilizing existing buildings, not impacting operations, also has a cost savings aspect. Then utility consumption and efficiencies. Every unit given our current building is 53 years old, from furnaces to water consumption to air efficiency with airflow, electricity, LED lighting. Every single utility that will go into the building will be significantly more efficient than what we currently have, even though it's electric. And then the final aspect, which was given a lot of consideration as we moved through each concept, was the adjacent properties. Traffic, the vehicle traffic entering and exiting the facility with our proposed conceptual layout will not change. The main road here on Picture Parkway will remain the main and only point of ingress and egress currently. Noise, the only portion of the site neighboring residential area will be utilized for material storage. Material storage is the quietest activity that we have, so we will store catch basins, piping, things of that nature there that we retrieve maybe once a day, and then there's no heavy equipment, no trucks operating in that area anymore. That ultimately ended up being the additional 8 acres that we purchased that is supposed to be senior housing, as shown on the earlier slide. That area will be utilized as yard regardless of the new project. Picking up that piece of property is a key component to our overall site, but even if there wasn't a new facility being proposed, we would utilize that area for operations, storage, all the types of things that I mentioned at the onset here that we can never have too much of. So even if this facility wasn't coming, we purchased that property, we would begin to utilize it as soon as possible for several different operational things. Essentially freeing up space in our existing facility by storing materials over there. As I said, mostly because it's the quietest activity we have. The proposed leaf compost location is located to the eastern portion of the property with prevailing winds coming from the west. That will allow the majority of the odor to move into the large vacant parcel to the east of the property. I mentioned the public area, that's going to be in a different location. So currently we transport leaf compost, leaf mulch to a location we have for our residents to come and pick up. That facility would be here, would be toward the northern section of our property, but it would only be seasonal, roughly 3 to 4 weeks in the spring. When we do our normal distribution, we would now do it at the highway facility in a slightly different portion than where the leaves sit the other 11 months of the year. And that's really where a lot of the turnover and some of the odor comes in. Stormwater runoff, the stormwater discharge from the site would remain in the same location, and additional treatment would be added. So right now, there are not a lot of stormwater facilities on the site. The proposed plan incorporates several of them to increase the treatment, but there would be new discharge locations added. They would be as they are currently. So project progress, our last presentation had several next steps. Those are listed at the top. So we had to solicit and award a design team. That's been awarded to MRB. We had the same thing for construction management. That's been awarded to campus construction very recently. We've begun the secret process to establish the town as the lead agency. Next steps now are the secret overview presentation, which will be in December. You may have seen me earlier in the project adjusting some of the wording on that. It originally had a public hearing. Not all seekers require a public hearing. We haven't got to the overview yet. So I did remove a portion that said public hearing for seeker because we're not sure yet if that is required. It may or may not be based on that'll get determined as we move along through the secret process whether or not it requires a public meeting. And then cost estimating right now is projected for mid-January, and that's when we will have 30% design plans for the overall site, which is very exciting. We've started that process. It's ongoing, getting into some of the more details and having meetings with the full design team, the construction management team, and LRB. So we're off to the races with that and excited to be moving forward. That brings us to questions and comments.
Love that chalk and leaf.
That is this week. So that's our current leaf pickup. We're over 700 loads this year, which is annually roughly 50% of what we collect total in the first 2 weeks of collection. And usually the collection is 4 to 5 weeks. So we're still about 2 weeks ahead in volume. So it's still moving a little slow, but it does create quite a pop.
That's not the weather qualities.
I hope so too. Yep, that's the fear. So everybody, get your leaves out there so we can get them collected and add to this pile because when the weather does come.
Well, thanks for the presentation, Pat. I'm glad we're moving forward. In referencing the leaves, I've had a conversation with supervisor yesterday. It just seems like all the leaves fell within a 7-day period. I know it did at my house. I was just astounded.
Like we have a Norway maple,
Are you still on?
still green.
I do not have one of those.
Yeah, they sure did. We've seen the same thing across the board. They all fell down in a very short period of time, which means the volume very high. And with the high volume, it takes longer to make rotations. So that's the current challenge. Yep.
No, Pat, thank you for the update. I know I was involved in this in the early days of this process and touring other facilities as the liaison, which Councilman Gabbard is. So it's nice to see this moving forward.
Yes.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting, as we get to January with 30% design, and I know campus is working with MRB on that. Because campus, I think, is construction management really assist in creating the bid process when we put it out. Because we have a point of reference of like Clarence out of Buffalo, will we be able to think, look at that 30% design and say, you know, is there any glaring surprises that could come up between 30 and 60%? That might be a question more for Bill.
We answer first, Bill, or you want to?
I don't think you'll see a glaring difference. Could be some differences,
Yeah.
but I don't think it'd be astronomical.
I would say they'd be market-driven, not design-driven. I don't know if that makes any sense, but by the time we get to 30%, we'll have things like geotech fully complete. That can have huge effects on foundations, cost of excavation, things of that nature. So the overall components will be established. I would say the only factor from that point forward really becomes market versus needing to pivot, change in design, really go back and reinvent the wheel on everything. From there forward, it's a great deal of detail, sourcing, looking at the particulars of what those are. You know, is there a better crane or different components of the building that we can get that would be more cost effective, not whether or not we need them. So the 30% should have all of the components and a lot of the unknowns eliminated, which is why that's where we're proposing to do the cost estimate that we discussed a lot about, wanting that to be as accurate as possible for decisions moving forward to be made. That seems like a very solid early stage to get there where you should have a major skill set.
Any other comments or questions?
Thanks, Pat.
Thank you.
All right.
Anybody who's, I shouldn't say got insomnia at home, with this, they've got a 12-page concept thing and all that stuff on the website. Or is Karen about to tell me it's not? But it will be.
It will be right after the meeting, yes.
Right. Because I think between the PowerPoint, the concept plan, all the attachments, it's got to be 50 pages of screenshots between verbiage and.
The overall?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I said close to 30 pages on the actual full in-depth report, which
Right.
has a lot more verbiage, not something we wanted to do as a presentation.
Absolutely.
So mine is a summary of literally one of the 7 concepts.
But
those
certainly,
same
if the citizens want a
considerations-
deep dive on that stuff, have at it.
Yeah, the same topics for consideration were looked at for all 7 concepts.
Right.
And you'll see a pros, cons, advantages, disadvantages for every single one in there, so it's much more in-depth.
Thanks, Pat. All right, well, next up is presentation by campus construction management in the town on the Sandbar Park Waterfront Revitalization Project, the progress here in 2022. That was a mouthful. I'm going to hand the baton off to Jared and Mary. No Chris, huh?
It's shy today, I'm right in.
Before we get started, thank you guys for having us. It's a great opportunity to highlight a really exciting project in the town.
And I should say, Jared is with Campus Construction Management, and Mary is our town engineer.
Yes, we wanted to give an update on all of the progress down at Sandbar Park. There's a lot that's happened this year. Want to start off with saying thank you to the team. So Webster Economic Development Alliance has been critical in getting us grants for this project. Pastor Associates as our civil engineering consultant, Mayor Landscape Architect as our landscape architect, Campus Construction Management, who helped with the bidding phase and is now our full-time inspector and helping us with construction management. And then can't forget the Ready Commission for helping fund this project, as well as the Department of State, and then all the support from the different departments of the town of Webster.
So the first few slides that we're going to get into are probably the least exciting, but some of the most important. The budget. We started off the project with a total allocated budget for this portion of work of, and I'm going to talk in round numbers, so $8.8 million roughly. Of that, we opened bids in March and awarded Keeler contracts in the amount of $7.4 million. That paired with consultant fees for Campus Pastoral, Air Landscape Architecture, and some other incidental costs, totaled $1,050,000. And then of that total construction cost, we take 5% for construction contingency, and that's used for anything that's unforeseen, any changes within the job that covers things like change orders. The initial budget was $373,000, of which we have spent on change orders $80,000, leaving a remaining $292,000. We're in a really great spot budget-wise. The initial onset of the project, most of your unforeseens with a project like this, things that are underground, things that you can't account for necessarily before you bid a project, these are the things that usually eat up a lot of that contingency cost. We're through that now. We're above grade. So it's a really good sign to be in the position we are. So budget-wise, the project is currently under budget, and I will cautiously optimistic about moving into the 2023 year, being in that same spot at the end of the project. So, next up is schedule. What we're going to do is kind of give an update on the goal and where we wound up at the end of the construction season this year. So the Lake Road portion of the work, the realignment and lifting of the road, a portion of it paid for through the Ready Grant MO 56. The goal was 75%. That brought us a road paved to binder and striped for 2 lanes of traffic. We achieved that goal on October 27th when we opened the roadway for 2-way traffic. The actual progress is at about 85%. We were able to complete additional drainage, additional sidewalk work. So we're trending 10% ahead of schedule as far as that part of the project goes. The next portion is the flood wall. This was planned 2023 work, just based on the contractor's input. The 10% goal is to make sure we have all of the submittals, how the wall's going to be built, everything through engineering and approved so they can actually put a shovel in the ground. We did that and a little bit more. We got some of the fill operation done in that area, some exploratory work. So we're about 5% ahead on that portion of work. And the last and probably the most impactful outside of the road is the park, which is partially paid for with Department of State grant. The goal on that, as you can see, was 25% of that work to be completed. That one got really far ahead. We're currently sitting around 45% complete with a lot of the sidewalk work, a portion of the shade structure, which you'll see in some of the photos, and really a lot of the fill operation to get that site lifted up is complete. So you'll see it, like I said, later in the presentation, some photos, and it's really coming along and taking shape. Next up is more of an in-depth dive into the actual parts and pieces that we did complete over this past construction year. So for that Lake Road project, the realignment and raising that road, we completed the roadway drainage, water line relocation, fill and realignment of the roadway, obviously that's the big one, installation of electrical and communications duct banks. That's what's allowing the power and communications lines to go underground through the park section. That was energized, I believe, last week. So you'll start seeing that getting further along, and those poles on the south side along the bay will start coming down. So installation of the granite curb, installation of base and binder courses of asphalt, which allowed us to open the road. And then we completed the temporary roadway striping for 2-way traffic. Remaining for 2023 is completion of the sidewalks along the road, installation of the top course of asphalt and final striping. And then moving forward from now, possibly through the winter, we're waiting on some schedule from RG&E, but we will see installation of street lighting along that corridor. And like I said, with power being moved over, they'll start removing the existing power poles along that stretch as well.
So some photos that we took over the course of this season. These first 3 are all taken from a very similar angle on the east end of the park, so you can see in this first photo, they've just completed filling in this area. The next photo, you can see they had the base for the road down. And then this final photo, you can see that the granite curb is in and 1 lane of the roadway has been paved. This is an aerial view from our stockpile, so you can see where the 1-way traffic was being routed and then the new road alignment in the stone closer to the north. And then this is what it looks like after the paving was completed and the striping. So you can see all the granite curves in. both the road and the parking lot on the north side have been paved, but they still remain to be topped, so that's something that will happen next year. Some photos of the electrical work that was done. The first photo is the duct bank prior to it being encased in concrete, which is the second photo. Then there's some drainage work and the curbing. And then this is an interesting aerial. It's looking east from the west side. So you can see how the road now is much more centered within the land, which was an effort to make it more resilient from any flooding in the water.
The next area of work, as mentioned before, is the flood wall. Again, being 2023 work, most of this is going to be work remaining. But the first part and piece that most of the people that were down there saw is the select tree removal. Pretty impactful. It was both on north and south sides of the road, but for the actual flood wall itself, the tree removals is the first step. As we discussed, the project submittals are being reviewed by the engineers. The fill operation on the south side of the road is approximately 70% complete. The south parking lot is just stone. It's currently a staging area, but they've done all the infrastructure pieces below that and gotten up to stone at this point. Another big piece was the installation of the Pure Water's grinder pump manhole in front of the pump station. That they'll be installing a new grinder pump in at a later date. Work remaining for 23 is going to be the actual shovel in the ground for installation of that flood wall. We're anticipating that in early spring. Completion of the fill operation, removal and replacement of that existing dock system. You see some photos of that. And then the installation of the kayak launch and some other park elements on that.
So some photos of work that happened on the south side of the road. You can see the tree clearing that happened early in the spring. The fill operations, that tarped pile there is currently screened topsoil that they'll be using within the project next year. Some drainage work that is outletting into the bay, the subbase for the parking lot, and then just some more clearing and preparation of the flood wall next year. The alignment is kind of approximately along where that black silt fence is shown.
The next area of work is the park. That's the one that changed probably the most. Work completed in 22 is the fill operation, bringing in a ton of fill in that area, really raised the whole profile of that area up. Installation of the stone walls, which you'll see in some of the photos. That's around the playground area and the woodland trail. Rough grading of the woodland trail, which resides on the north side of the project. It's a walkway along the lake. The shade structure foundations are in, as well as the flat work, the concrete work around it. The restroom facility, utilities, as well as the foundation work there is complete. It's waiting until next year to get the actual building installed on top of it. Installation of the multimodal path, although it is not open yet, much of that is complete at this point. And then the concrete flat work, that's the sidewalks and other trailways that are within the park. So work for 23 that remains is the completion of those sidewalks, the installation of the stone dust path along the woodland trail, the installation of the playground, installation of all the landscaping, trees, bushes, and then installation of the actual shade structure and the restroom facility.
Some photos of progress in the park. You can see the tree removal that occurred, the large fill operation that happened in the middle photo, and then some of the pathways roughed in with stone subbase in the final photo. The northern parking lot with curbing and stone base in, which, as I mentioned before, has been paved with binder. Then the woodland path has the stone wall curving around it. And the play area also has a stone wall that's facing Lake Road. And then the final picture is the area that the shade structure will go in. There's a nice exposed aggregate concrete in that area, and then it ties into the sidewalk. Wanted to go over those aspects that are going to be the highlight of next year's construction. Some renderings that Bayer Landscape helped us with previously, showing the play area. That center structure is the public restroom, so that's an actual rendering with the finishes that were selected for that building, so it'll look very similar to that. The shade structure, again, that's a rendering of what it will look like, all white with triangular shaped flag structures, whatever you call it. And then lawn areas. And then on the south side of Lake Road, we will be putting in the ADA kayak launch, and there'll be kind of a beach area around it for more putting your boat in directly from the land if you wish. Obviously, it won't be any sort of swimming area, but just access via boat to the water, and an area to kind of sit and look at the area. The dock that will be going in replacement of the existing dock, lots of sidewalks and green space and plantings and multimodal path, which is almost complete, but a lot of the plantings and beautification are still outstanding. And then the flood wall is the big ticket item for next year. Wanted to remind the public that although we did get a little bit more done in the park than we anticipated, it does remain closed. The parking areas, the walkways, they might look inviting, but it is still certainly a construction zone and unsafe to be in. So do not use those areas, and we will be working diligently to get it open to the public by the fall of 2023. Before I go to the last slide, I do have a video to play, so this is a bird's eye view of the progress that was taken last weekend. This is a rendering, it gets better. So it's going from east to west in this view. There was a guy in the image earlier, you can see him, he's got a yellow vest.
You can see along the bayside, which is on the left of the screen, that darker asphalt path, that's what we keep referencing as the multimodal path. So you can see most of it is in, but the connectors and ramps to get onto it, we're leaving out just so no one tries to use them. And then it's, on the north side, the lake side, you can see all the concrete that is in, and then certain areas that were intentionally left out so that we can move equipment through the park with some of the next aspects of work that have to get completed in that area. And then that triangle on the north side is obviously where the shade structure will reside.
It's amazing how low the water was by the end of the season. Hopefully it's low when they put the flood wall in next spring.
So you can see that curved stone wall section. That's where the playground will actually be.
You know, what this doesn't give perspective on, we walked it a couple of weeks ago in one of our monthly meetings, is that however many 4 to 8 feet of fill, you stand here now, and your view over the bay compared to when it was 4 or 8 foot less, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, you can definitely see it when you're driving from west to east,
Yeah.
coming down. You get a lot better view of the bay 4 feet higher as you drive through there, certainly.
Yeah, I did that last weekend, the change in the whole landscape and topography of the area is just really incredible because, you know, I've driven down here while it was under construction with the traffic and all that, but there's so much going on, you really don't get a full view of what's happening. But now that it's all cleared up and where you are, it's incredible.
Yeah, it's gonna be a real gem for the town once it's complete next summer, fall. Yeah, just real quick, I know I said thanks to some earlier in the presentation, but I also want to extend it to a few more. Monroe County has been partnering with us for both a portion of the flood wall, and they've been assisting with the design of the roadway as it will eventually be turned back over to them as it is a county road. Their Ready Grant was thanks to EFC, Environmental Facilities Corporation. Our Ready Grant was contributed by DASNY. And then the Parks and Recreation and Historic Preservation has been very in tune with the project. And we do have monthly calls with a lot of agencies involved in this project. So that's been helping us keep on track. And then a big thank you to Keeler. They've been doing a great job out there. They've gotten us ahead of schedule, and they've been a great partner on this project with the town, so kudos to them. And then if there's any questions,
Yeah,
or
Real
anything
quick.
Jared wants to say?
no, I appreciate all the patience, all the neighbors in that specific area have had with the project. It's, you know, there's been some bumps, but I think people are kind of seeing the vision of the project and should be appreciative, obviously, of everything it's going to be, but they've been gracious and have allowed the project to move on, and it's been much appreciated on the construction side of things, so, thank you.
Congratulations on the project, under budget and ahead of schedule, so kudos to everyone that's been involved in this.
Anybody else? Thanks, gang.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, our last item up tonight is a presentation and update on the West Webster Hamlet project in 600 Ridge Road, the old Webster Furniture's building. And I think it is going to be Josh and Rick Suzo and Kathy is going to be Josh. He did?
Yes.
Okay. Well, Josh, I'm sure you can handle it solo.
Yes, I will try and get through everything relatively quickly. I know everyone's been here for a while, so. Okay, so tonight I'm going to briefly go over 3 separate yet related topics having to do with the West Webster Hamlet revitalization efforts. What you're looking at on the screen to the left is an outline of the study area for the planning study that's currently going on. It encompasses Old Bridge Road from Bay Road, where it adjoins to Empire Boulevard, all the way to Hatch Road, and then Empire Boulevard to the Penfield border. So that's the study area for the planning study. We're also going to be providing an update on 600 Ridge Road, the former Webster Furniture Stripper building. And then we're also going to talk a little bit about the Restore New York grants and next steps. So just to briefly recap where we're at on the planning study. So the Webster Economic Development Alliance, WEDA, secured a $100,000 grant back in June of 2021. These are federal transportation dollars that can be used for transportation and land use planning. So then the town developed the scope of work for the study. We issued a request for proposals last fall in October 2021. Received 7 proposals, formed a consultant selection team in January of this year, and ultimately selected Ingalls Planning and Design. So then we went on to form technical and citizen committees. Technical committees being comprised of town officials and Monroe County and New York State Departments of Transportation, as well as the Genesee Transportation Council, who is funding the study. So the project officially kicked off in March of this year. We launched our first round of public engagement online through a mechanism called Social Pinpoint. It was an interactive website where people could put points on a map, identify areas of concern, give their vision and propose their recommendations for the area. And then most recently, we had a public open house meeting in October at Liberty Lodge, and we had well over 70 people show up, so there was definitely a lot of interest in the community as a part of this project. And then moving along to a brief update on 600 Ridge Road, the former Webster Furniture Strip building. Many people may not know the back history on this property, but essentially the property became delinquent with property taxes back in 2005. So the county initiated the tax foreclosure process. Monroe County declined taking title to the property due to unknown environmental concerns. So they continued to put it up for auction each year annually, and each year it did not sell through that process. So eventually, Monroe County sold some of the delinquent tax liens to a third party, and those were ultimately auctioned off last year to an out-of-state investor. So this is a perfect example of a property that is in purgatory. So the town, I know Charlie's been very intimately involved in this effort. The town's been working with Monroe County to enter into an intermunicipal agreement, which was executed last month, for the purpose of taking temporary control of the property so that phase 2 environmental testing could be conducted. The thought here is if we can remove some of the ambiguity in terms of the environmental concerns, it may make it more marketable for redevelopment. So in advance of that cleanup, the town facilitated an exterior cleanup of the property so that the county's consultants could have unobstructed access when they went in to collect samples and perform test borings. So the environmental testing is currently underway. We're hoping to have the results back sometime next month, hopefully by the end of this year. And most recently, we've been made aware of an initiative from New York State, Empire State Development. It's called the Restore New York Communities Initiative. So what this is a mechanism that provides municipalities with financial assistance for the revitalization of vacant and abandoned commercial and residential properties. So this program encourages community development and neighborhood growth, pretty much through the elimination and redevelopment of blighted structures. So there are several properties within our study area that we feel could potentially be eligible for a grant of this nature. It was just released about a week and a half ago on Friday, October 28th. So this is relatively new. So we've been working very closely with Matt Chatfield on determining what the next steps would be to essentially pursue this funding opportunity. So basically, the municipality needs to declare their intent to apply for this grant program. That is due by Wednesday, November 30th, so at the end of this month. And then we have about 2 months to compile and finalize our actual application, which would be due by Friday, January 27th. So next steps in terms of each of these that I just went through. In terms of the planning study, the town is in the process of sending out outreach letters to all 180 property owners, just making everyone aware that the study's going on and what the town's efforts have been to date for revitalization of this area. There are a couple more steering committee meetings to be had during the months of December and January. Hoping to have the draft recommendations complete by January, and hoping to wrap up the planning study and have a final plan sometime in February 2023. In terms of 600 Ridge Road, I mentioned that environmental testing will be complete, hopefully by the end of this month. We will hopefully have the results of that testing next month. And then there's been some discussion about potentially taking advantage of this window of time where we have temporary control of this property to go in and do a structural assessment to see if the building is structurally sound and if there's any chance for it to be rehabilitated, or if it's so far gone and functionally obsolete that it would be cost prohibitive. I think that would provide a much clearer direction for the town and the plan and the strategy.
Who'll do the structural assessment for you? You know?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Who's going to do the structural assessment?
Well, we would need to obviously procure and request proposals for that service.
Yeah.
Yes, we have to move pretty quickly because we have until January 18th.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. So we already have begun reaching out to engineering firms that perform this sort of service. And once we have, more of them, we can certainly act upon them once we have all that specific information. In terms of the Restore New York grants, as I mentioned earlier, the letter of intent to apply is due by the end of this month. I believe there's a proposed resolution on the agenda for the 17th if the town board decides after this discussion that this is something that the town should pursue. We have a placeholder for a resolution indicating the town intends to apply, which is a requirement of the grant application process. Another potential thing that we've discussed is initiating an income survey of the study area. Now, this is optional. This is not really something that's required as a part of the grant application. However, speaking candidly with Matt Chatfield, he's indicated that this income survey could benefit the town and be used for a multitude of grant applications for the next 5 years. So if we can prove that there's a contrast in medium income, household income along Old Ridge Road as it compares to some of the other adjacent areas with larger, more expensive homes, it could both strengthen our application for this program and can also help us obtain future funding through the Community Development Block Grant. And those could help fund infrastructure improvements that are likely going to come out of the planning study, such as reconfiguring restoration of intersections, addition of sidewalks, things of that nature. So I have both of those as optional. There obviously is a cost component to those, so we would need to identify, how much it's going to cost, and if the town board is willing to spend the money. In my opinion, I think it would be money well spent and would potentially put us in a stronger position moving forward to get even more grant funding to keep the momentum rolling. So we hope to ID and solidify the eligible properties in the area that we would want to be targeting with this program. We'd like to have that done by December 15th. And then another requirement of the grant is to have a public hearing. A public hearing would be required, advertising the proposed properties that would be in this program. So this is, the municipality acts almost like a pass-through. These are privately owned properties that would be improved with New York State grant monies. The town would just be the administrator of that. So, as I mentioned, the application for that is due at the end of January. And with that, I will turn it over to the board for any questions, comments, concerns.
Mike, go ahead with the grant application. That being said, what is involved in an income survey?
So an income survey would entail, which we've already quantified the number of properties and have all of the property ownership data. It would basically entail either door-to-door knocking and actually interacting and obtaining data face-to-face, or it could be a hard copy survey that is distributed, mailed out to all properties within that area, and they would answer a series of questions. I have not seen a sample, an exact sample of what the nature of the questions are. And then there's a professional service provider that specializes in this sort of thing. And that's why I was hoping that Matt would be here, because he's a lot more well-versed when it comes to the income survey topic. But it would essentially be gathering data on all of the property information in regards to income. Okay.
You also stated that's optional.
That is correct.
I mean, you can't force anyone to do it.
That is correct.
I think at the village board workshop within the last couple of weeks, one of these income survey companies came in and presented, if I recall. And Matt was there. That sound familiar, Josh?
I'm not personally aware of that, but that could very well be true.
I think it is, and I mean, that's when Matt said, this might give us, it's optional, obviously, but it might put us in a position to get this grant better than if we didn't have it, and future grants for the next 5 years in that area. But what we haven't gotten from the firm is like, what does this cost? I mean, obviously, before we would commit to anything like that, we need to know what it costs. And I don't think we've got that information.
Right. We have an estimated idea of what a typical survey might cost, but nothing definitive.
Well, it's such a finite, you're talking about maybe 70 or 80 properties, residents, whatever, that should be doing the survey of, because it's literally, obviously when you go north on gravel road, you go up a couple hundred yards, you're on Houston, those streets there, probably $300,000 to $500,000 houses. It's a world of difference from the residents that live on that strip of Ridge Road. And that's what you're basically trying to prove.
Correct.
Well, it's nice to see we're moving forward, Josh, and thank you for
Yeah, thank you.
the information today. This has been a long, long road.
Yeah.
And
Sure
Attorney
is.
Genesi, thank you for your efforts in
Yes.
moving forward to, let's get the testing done.
Only took us 14 years.
That's all, yes.
Charlie had an afro when this started. Anyway, with that being said, unless anybody else has anything, I realize there was a lot jammed into this. We don't have a workshop in 2 weeks, enjoy Thanksgiving. I think we're done for the evening, correct? Thank you, everybody, thank you, Josh.
Here.
Yes. Yeah, and I'm gonna try to get here at 8:30.
Yeah, no, I'm gonna try to-
Are
you bringing it? I was gonna.
Oh.
I was gonna get some too. What were you gonna, what were you gonna do? We could split.
we talk, yeah.
I was gonna go to Dunkin' and get one of those things of coffee.
You get the coffee, I'll go to Brewers and get this one.
That's great. Okay.
And that's for the committee, not the.
No, not the applicants, no.
No.
I mean, if they think we're gonna feed them, they're gonna go to this.
Right,
No, we're gonna feed ourselves.
yeah.
We're
No.
interviewing,
Oh, yeah, look at this guy. That is so predictable.
Not open to town board members.
I'm about to find out. I mean, because,
You guys gotta ask, right?
you know, it's all in the, get up. So, I'll tell you in a second. The second?
okay.